The options are dwindling in free agency just as the White Sox are about to get active. Harrison Bader could provide some value, but don't be surprised if the front office overlooks that for one reason.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Todd Welter, and welcome to Locked On White Sox, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm a lifelong Sox fan and been podcasting here for over 2 seasons, and I've also covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And on today's show, I'll get to this week's What Could Have Turned Out Differently segment from an angle of had Luis Robert Jr. continued to be an all-star, would the White Sox have gotten the trade package from the Mets that the Milwaukee Brewers just got for all-star pitcher Freddy Peralta? After I discuss if Luisangel Acuna is just a smaller version of Luis Robert Jr. But first, let's tackle how Harrison Bader would add value to the White Sox, but it's probably not going to happen because they want to give Acuna a runway, and that could prevent the front office from signing Bader. So I talked about how GM Chris Getz has said that the team now has the financial flexibility to make some moves in free agency in yesterday's show. You know, now that Luis Robert Jr.'s $20 million is off the books, suddenly the White Sox can be active in free agency, even though they probably could have been active in free agency. They only had about, 87 million committed in actual player payroll before the trade, but apparently you had to get Luis Robert Jr.'s $20 million off the books. And it's sad that the White Sox had to wait for the market to clear out. You know, Cody Bellinger basically had to sign for Robert Jr. to actually have a market. And since it took Bellinger forever to sign, the options on the free agent market are not exactly great at this point. However, as of this taping, Harrison Bader is still on the market, and I do think the White Sox could actually upgrade the lineup over Luis Robert Jr. by signing Bader in one key area before you lose your mind and before you're like, because again, there's a lot of emotions right now when it comes to the White Sox trading Luis Robert Jr. And I get the emotions are, on the more frustrated side. I understand that, especially because it just looks like a salary dump. But there is one area that Harrison Bader would actually provide some value to the lineup, and that's hitting right-handed pitching, as Bader has grown leaps and bounds in that area. However, here's the catch. The front office wants to give Luisangel Acuña a runway to live up to his former top 5 Mets prospect status, and it sounds like center field is the only spot to give him that runway. And when I went back and watched GM Chris Getz's presser, I'm wondering if acquiring a center fielder is a priority, because here's what Getz said in general about where they will go with the money that's been freed up.
When you move on from a Louis Robert, there's this assumption that, a certain position needs to be filled, but it's increasing talent on the team to help us win ball games. That could come in starting pitching, relievers, balancing right-handed versus left-handed. So we're very open-minded and, excited to get to work and being creative and bringing in that talent.
And obviously sort of being vague, because all GMs are, but when you do look at the updated opening day roster projection that at least I've made out, they do need to balance out the lineup, at least in terms of adding a true left-handed bat. So I think that might be their focus, because right now I'm actually moving Jarred Kelenic in, provided he has a good spring training, to the bench and rolling with 3 outfielders. And I know that may seem like a lot, but look at what you got defensively starting in the outfield. Benintendi, Acuna, Baldwin. So you could at least move Acuna to short, Colson to third, and Vargas to first for late close game defense if need be. But you got to ask yourself, do you want to roll the dice with Jarred Kelenic, who keeps not living up to the hype? Or would you prefer trying Michael Conforto on a bounce-back deal? And that might be where they're going. Because if it came down to picking between Bader and Conforto in a vacuum, it's obviously Bader. Because he actually might, again, be at least, neutral, maybe somewhat of at least an upgrade in terms of when it comes to right-handed hitting over Luis Robert Jr. And remember, for those who are like, how are you, what? Because again, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration about Luis Robert Jr. and all the value and all that. Remember, as my buddy Besnick Security from OnTapSportsNet.com tweeted out, this was Luis Robert Jr.'s production against righties. As he tweeted at Bez Beyond the Pen with a little sarcasm, I don't know how the hashtag White Sox are going to replace Luis Roberts' 211, 272, 329 slash line and 318 PAs against right-handed pitching. I'm at a loss. And when you look at Bader's slash line last season against righties in 344 plate appearances, it was 300, 369, 476. And he's actually getting better at hitting righties even at age 31, because he had a 253, 296, 385 slash line in 2024, and it was 207, 240, 263 in 2023. So you're getting improvement. For Robert Jr., he's regressed against righties during that span. Even during the All-Star year in 2023 that he slashed 252, 303, 531 against right-handed pitching. And then it went down to 233, 271, 413 in 2024. And defensively, it's kind of a wash. I mean, Bader in center, 6 defensive runs saved last year, 3 outs above average. Robert was 0 defensive runs saved, but 7 outs above average. So again, kind of depending on what metric you look at. And while Bader has played some right field, if he is seeking a multi-year deal, even if it's 2 seasons, you don't really want to clog up right field that long, because Brady Montgomery could be as ready as soon as July, and that's your top prospect. And he's definitely the future. And even if you give him a 1-year deal, that gets in the way of Project Runway that Getz keeps talking about when it comes to Acuna.
Hasn't really gotten a runway at the major league level. We have opportunity here, and we can provide that runway to show off his talent and his ability and his ceiling, in which, the industry has been very high on this player for a long time. We've been tracking him for a long time. When you're assessing the player, obviously you go through your scouting process, your analytic process, and you come to a decision. But to be able to bring in a young, exciting player that plays all over the diamond, a strong defender, an elite defender, elite base runner, can make contact, is very strong instincts for the game. I know over in New York, talking to individuals over there, they did not want to get rid of him. I know that. And that's because of how valuable he can be with the team. Now, he was on a roster that didn't really allow him to go out there and show what he can do on a regular basis, in which we're going to be able to provide that.
Going out, regular basis, runway. And also, after you hear Getz talk about where Acuna is playing, I'm reading between the lines of center field with Derek Hill and Evan Pereira in reserve for injuries to the infield, as they would probably then move Acuna, and or again, later close games defense, as again, you would probably be moving Acuna to play second or short. And even then you might not have to, because Chase Mydroth isn't a terrible defender at second base. But again, with Murakami at first base, maybe you want Vargas there. But this is where Getz is talking about where Acuna may play.
Defensive projection, he grades out above average in all places, including center field. He's been playing center field in Venezuela. I think it's probably close to 15 or so games. He's plus, maybe even plus in every infield position. And I would imagine in time he's going to be plus in center field if he isn't already. But the beauty of this is the versatility. We've got Chase Mydroth, Colson Montgomery that have moved around different positions. Obviously, Colson's our shortstop. Chase has played a lot of second base and shortstop. Acuna can play in all those positions. To have someone that can fill in if someone goes down, when you're looking to optimize your defense, he slides in pretty much anywhere on the field. So just to have that valuable piece is going to make Will's job a lot easier in optimizing a lineup on a regular basis. So you look at the next 5+ years with Acuna hopefully on our club. You're looking at a guy that can play in any of these positions. He's played the most at shortstop and second base and has showed elite defense there. But the ability to really move other guys around with his ability to fill in everywhere is extremely valuable for us.
So if he's looked at a super utility role, then obviously you could still have a path to Bader. But on the flip side, then yeah, that's a terrible trade return for Luis Robert Jr. But I'm still not going to pin my hopes on the Sox signing a center fielder, even though Bader would probably be a great addition, because they want to give Acuna that runway. And obviously the goal was getting Acuna in this deal. And James Fegan has a piece on SoxMachine.com that suggests the White Sox might have gotten a talent similar to Robert Jr. in the deal, only smaller. Let's discuss next. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. And I've used TurboTax in the past with how my income is mixed between W-2 and 1099 income. It was well worth it as they took care of crunching the numbers for me and saving me a ton of time. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointments today. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. You get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On White Sox compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. You'll also get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. And I would love to talk White Sox baseball with you in the Discord chat, especially once the season starts, as we can discuss what is happening on game day, whether we love what's going on or loathing it. Go to lockedonwhitesox.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. So when I saw SoxMachine.com's James Fegan tweeting the preview of his latest great piece of work, and again, I suggest you go read it, I got intrigued when he tweeted this out. I got the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. I'll read it out for those that are possibly watching on Apple or Spotify. At JR Fegan, Luisangel Acuña offers good defense and base running and a fun offensive tools that haven't translated the last 2 years. Sounds like the guy he was traded for, even if it's still hard to believe that this is how it ended up for Luis Robert Jr. with the Sox. And, what he wrote about is more about kind of how things came to an end, Luis Robert Jr., how he came to the Sox, how it was, all sunshine and rainbows, and how it's just nothing more than inconsistency. But there is similarities between Acuna and Robert Jr. And I know for those that are still in their feelings, it's going to be hard for this to hear, but there is this one, especially when it comes to elite speed, and then also having that capability to use that speed to cover a lot of that ground in the outfield. Because even though I've been accused of being happy or, oh, you think you're right, I liked watching Luis Robert Jr. especially play defense. He took away doubles, and it was fun to watch him run. What I just didn't like was, as you saw, it probably kind of took out his legs a little bit. And I was definitely scared to what if he was going to be having an outfield like there was a suggestion of Nick Castellanos and Andrew Bennett, him and Andrew Bennett tending the outfield. I mean, Luis Robert Jr. would not have survived April, okay? And even with Brooks Baldwin, I do think he has some athleticism. I think he's not the biggest guy, but, again, he runs well. That it could help Luis Robert Jr., but still, he would have had to have covered ground. But the key for Acuna, and I can already say it now, and I agree with you on this, he's got to avoid being Eloy Jimenez right now, as he struggled to put the ball in the air in 2025. But here's the difference. Acuna recognizes it, but potential is a huge thing that James threw around in his excellent work. And kind of, when you look at it, it's kind of that same sort of skepticism of, could he? He's very talented, but is he ever going to hit it? And I'm fine with everybody having the skepticism of those that hated the trade return and wanting to keep LRJ. Again, because there's a lot to like about what LRJ helps you in the margins. But again, there's a lot of skepticism on the front end of, is LRJ going to stay healthy? He's just potential outside of that 1 year. So since this is a free article, I suggest, though, still getting a subscription to SoxMachine.com. But this is kind of the nugget I want to share in terms of Acuna kind of being in the same boat as Luis Robert Jr. in terms of being an intriguing talent, but still needing to actually actualize it. And literally the younger brother of the former NL MVP and 5-time All-Star Braves outfielder Ronald Jr. As such, genetics are strong enough of a thing where the 24-year-old multi-position athlete offers 97th percentile sprint speed and dizzying bat speed, especially for someone who only stands 5'8". And the Sox have had interest in putting his raw ingredients into the hands of Ryan Fuller and their hitting development team for months now. If the White Sox are going to become any good, this is the sort of play they will need to run successfully and run a lot. Venezuelan Winter League is no grand proving ground, but Acuna is hitting 282, 397, 542 down there, already at work with swing changes geared at creating more loft. Quote, last year with the Mets, my ground ball rate was too high, Acuna said via interpreter. That's why I've been trying to stay behind the ball a little bit longer and trying to use more of my right leg in order to put the ball in the air, end quote. Acuna came up as an infielder and won't be throwing those gloves away, even if at first glance the Sox depth chart suggests he could best get the runway to develop into an everyday player by staking a claim to Roberts' vacated spot in center. But since Acuna has spent the last 2 years accumulating below-average offensive numbers in both AAA and the majors, Sox officials aren't going out of their way, at least not yet, to sell him as a player who will provide tons of production on offense. Acuna's base running and defensive value are what made the trade fair, and unlocking his offensive potential is what could make it a win. After all, that's what the Mets could say about their side of the return, too. And again, I mean, outside of being a very exciting player for the first couple of years, Robert basically became you can't totally look at everything he can do at the plate. You could look at the potential, but what he was a very good base runner, as he showed in 2025, and an elite defender, and he could crush left-handed pitching. That was his role. And on the Mets, even if that's all he provides the Mets, that's going to help the Mets because that's really what they're looking for. They're obviously wanting a bounce back, just like he said. The biggest side on the White Sox to win this deal is yes, they need Acuna to reach his ceiling, which, yeah, I kind of, it's the same sort of skepticism that the, non-Robert truthers had. And right there, unlocking his potential at the plate would make this a trade win for the White Sox, much like the Mets getting the 2023 version, or again, at least something better than what we saw in 2024 and 2025. If Luis Robert Jr., stays healthy. And that's the other thing. Him just staying healthy. And none of that, again, I've seen the tweets, I've seen the anger, and that's valid. Those feelings are valid of there's another guy that he's probably going to leave and he's going to be the best version of himself. I get that. But, we just, sometimes we just got to let some guys go. And if they become the better version of themselves, maybe they just couldn't let go of the dark reign of terror because, again, Chris Getz is trying to change the culture, and so is Will Venable. You got to at least give them that. They are trying. I know Jerry Reinsdorf is still the owner. That could cast a dark shadow, but we only got to deal with him for just so long. And that's why I don't get obsessively upset anymore about that. But when you look at the advanced stats for 2025, when Acuna got a bit more playing time, you do see a guy that's got a long way to go to being, reaching that ceiling. I mean, 97th percentile. I've got the graphic for those up for those watching on YouTube. Obviously, the speed, the base running value, that's in the red, but there's a lot of stuff that is still needing to be, moving up. And again, why do I bring this up? Baseball Savant's good for looking at, those margin areas that also can still provide some value. Bat speed obviously has potential, but barreling up the ball, hitting it hard, walking more, that's something you want to see out of a speedster, like, say, Luis Robert Jr., where, again, there was some more value. And that's why, even though it was time to move on, or, who knows when you needed to move on, this might have been the best. We could always discuss that. And to the truth, there's your thing. I'm happy LRJ is gone, and I'm a hater. I believe I made it clear that I wasn't against him coming back because I do acknowledge, for those watching right now, look at a lot of the red from Baseball Savant, the baseball running value. You got plenty of, red and some stuff trending, the fielding, the running, and that's what you would love to see out of Luisangel Acuna. You just would like to see, obviously, the better overall production, not being stuck at like 220, that type of stuff. So, and again, when it comes to Luis Robert Jr., I'll acknowledge he helped you win some games on the margins. In fact, I can point to at least 3 games, just off, at least I know for a fact one game off my memory where he won the game basically by himself with the help of the pitching. Beat Chris Sale. And there's a couple of games last year where it was the same thing. He hit a home run. I think he had a couple doubles and just caught everything. And the pitching was outstanding. It's just, again, I'm realistic that the trade market was never going to get higher. The injury risk was significant, and the potential to go on prolonged slumps to sink it was really there. And he was likely gone after 2027. So you had to trade him at some point. So what they did in this deal is getting another athlete with the ability to fly on the base paths in the outfield, has a good arm. Hopefully it translates to center, where you got to obviously make some longer throws. And you probably are going to lose some home run power. He's showing some pop at Venezuela. I'm still more not banking on him being this power hitter, but could he have gap power like you're hoping Chase Mydroth and Brooks Baldwin can provide? Because then you'd have the potential to have three guys who could be your bat-to-ball guys that this lineup does need. They do need some guys that still hit doubles, even singles sometimes, but they need to run the bases well. Again, that's why Luis Ariz gets disqualified. I'm sorry. He just doesn't run the bases well. And again, I understand that the fear that the White Sox at least traded a guy who has proven he can rob a lot of doubles and occasionally hit some home runs and does hit left-handed hitting. I understand that can be very scary because, again, they traded him for a guy that has a ceiling, but he could also have a bust potential of Billy Hamilton-like proportions. But the mitigant on this too, and why they're doing it, this is me, listening to a lot of the comments. The club control clock was running out on Luis Robert Jr. and waiting on the potential was running out. Waiting on him to bounce back was running out. With Acuna, you at least reset the club control a lot longer to see if he can go beyond his floor. Now, for those clamoring for a better deal, let's discuss on this week's Turned Out Differently segment. If Luis Robert Jr. had continued to maintain an all-star level of play, would they have gotten the same type of deal that the Brewers just got for Freddy Peralta and Tobias Myers? Let's discuss that next. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and the #1 sports podcast network. Shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. And if you haven't yet, sign up for the Everydayer Club. You can go to lockedonwhitesox.supercast.com. You get an ad-free audio podcast of the show and an invite to a members-only Discord chat where we can talk White Sox baseball. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, or wherever you get your audio podcasts, as we're on places such as Apple or Spotify. And make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com or on TapSportsNet.com. So the Brewers clearly got a better return from the Mets than the White Sox did. Pitchers Freddy Peralta is a rental too. And Tobias Myers, they traded them to the Mets for a highly regarded prospects, outfielder Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat. Again, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher his name. But he's also a highly regarded pitcher. And again, why did the Mets make that deal? Well, clearly they're going for a title. They're trying to keep up with the Dodgers. And also because Freddy Peralta has been a frontline, two-time All-Star starting pitcher with 5 seasons of an ERA under 4, and also logging over 144 innings in 4 of those 5 seasons. Luis Robert Jr., on the other hand, even though he is a position player, so it's not like you can always, it's not totally apples to apples, but it's still in terms of star power. He has just 1 All-Star selection to his name, and he's only avoided major IL stints in that 2023 All-Star year. Otherwise, always injury-prone and inconsistent. But let's say 2023 was the starting point of a healthy, outstanding run. Would that have gotten the White Sox a major haul of even 2 talented prospects? Well, it just depends on what the production to money calculation would be by the Mets and the White Sox, because again, that's how these trades get added up. Some look at surplus value, some look at the total amount of value, all that stuff. Either way, it goes into basically a formula or calculation. It's kind of like, for those that pay attention to football, the Jimmy Johnson draft trade chart where you assign up points. Now, if you went by Fangraphs, the White Sox, probably would have actually had to throw in another big leaguer. But if you go by baseball trade values, they get a similar return for LRJ, and LRJ alone, if he was producing consistent all-star value, not glimpses of it, consistent all-star value. And maybe they even have it more. And obviously, I have a feeling they're going to trade him sooner, but I'll talk about that in a second. But the prospects that the Mets sent, Williams is a 55-grade prospect hitter per Fangraphs dollar value. That is worth $46 million. Sproat is a 50-grade prospect pitcher, and that is worth $21 million. Again, I've heard different when I go up to YouTube, because I do try to research, even though somebody accused me that I don't. I do try to research. I've heard different, pronunciations of that. So obviously, I acknowledge that I butchered his name. But you're talking about $67 million in dollar value. Peralta, per Fangraphs, produced $29 million in value in 2025. Myers at $3 million, although he regressed from a $17 million season in 2024. So you could maybe bump him up in somewhere in between that. But in a deal like this, so you're saying, well, again, how do they pull it off with Fangraphs by having to throw in this? And it was reported that the Mets demanded another big league player back, so that's why they had to throw in Myers. But if you're looking for a deal and prospects back, you're always looking for full value plus, whether it's 125% markup, 150. So the Brewers did very well. And baseball trade values tends to be a little bit more lower in terms of, and using that surplus value. They had Williams at 20.9 million, Sproat at 23.8 million, Peralta at 26 million in surplus value, Myers at 7.5 million. So, as you can see, they definitely did well again. And if you think about it, Robert Jr. in 2023 produced over $39 million in value per Fangraphs. Let's say he stays along those lines. Both models would likely see a major trade haul coming back. So yeah, had things turned out differently with LRJ's career, you're going to get something better. Although if you hate this trade from the White Sox side, you're really going to hate the baseball trade values perspective, because they argue the deal that they made with the White Sox for Luis Robert Jr. was an overpay by the Mets. And I've got the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. This is what @BaseballValues tweeted out. Today, the hashtag Mets reportedly acquired outfielder Luis Robert Jr. minus $2.8 million surplus trade value from the White Sox in exchange for utility Luisangel Acuña, $7.9 million, and right-handed pitcher Truman Pauly, not yet in the system. The deal is rejected by our model as an overpay by New York. Robert is owed $22 million between his 2026 salary and 2027 buyout. He hasn't been able to stay healthy over the past 2 years and hasn't performed on the field. He was worth less than 2 F4 combined from 2024 to 2025. There's upside, but plenty of risk at a high cost. Acuna hasn't put it together yet, but still has value as a former top prospect with years of control. The Mets have a surplus of players like Acuna and could afford Robert's contract as well as anyone, but still, on paper, this looks like a loss from a surplus value perspective. And I mean, it would definitely not be a surplus loss had the team traded him when they probably should have. And that was after the 2023 season. But honestly, I don't think we can slam the club for not pulling off that deal. I mean, because first of all, if I remember correctly, the Astros were really the only team rumored to be bold enough at the 2023 July trade deadline to be interested and even be pulling it off. Because I remember I wrote something for DeWindyCity.com, part of the Fansided Network. And it literally would have cost them a ton of prospect capital that I actually do believe I broke baseball trade values when it was free, when I tried to run a trade. I think it would have had to have gone over like 7-8 prospects. And I think baseball trade values at the time when they did their trade machine only allowed like 5 players. And second, Houston's farm system wasn't exactly going to provide those timeline accelerating prospects that you would want in that type of deal. Now, again, Bruce Levine from 670 The Score did say that the Mets and the Phillies and the Padres have been in on Robert for 2 years. So maybe they were still kicking the tires. But again, it just sounded like the Astros were really the only ones that were bold enough to say, yeah, let's go for it. And obviously the White Sox rejected it at the time because, again, also in context, you still had 4 years of club control with Luis Robert Jr. he was ascending. I don't think anyone could have foreseen, I mean, maybe the injuries, but this type of dissension. And maybe the timing to have dealt him could have also been after 2024 to still at least get a decent return. I mean, because you still had the memories of 2023 fresh in him on a $15 million contract. But again, Getz overplayed his hand too many times. Could have moved into the Reds, but the paying down of the money was a bug, was something that the White Sox didn't want to do. And demanding Rhett Lauder or Chase Burns was a bridge too far. However, I think if LRJ did stay healthy and even produced a solid 2024 season, he's probably out the door by then. And you are getting this complete start from scratch. And I think that is why this trade return seeming light has so much blame to go around. And again, I think it's just the shock that, wow, we were supposed to have a dynasty, and instead we got barely anything out of last decade's rebuild, and it's really, really hitting some people here. And just the frustration with Jerry Reinsdorf. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. I'll be back tomorrow with what I was going to tackle today, but I moved because, I wanted to discuss the topics I went over today. And then I shared my conversation with James Fox of FutureSox.net about how much prospect watching we should do this season. And I hope you have a great day. And make sure you subscribe to Locked On White Sox on YouTube at Locked On White Sox, or follow or subscribe at wherever you get your audio podcast so you'll get all the latest episodes. The show is on places such as Apple or Spotify. You can follow the show on X, formerly Twitter, at Locked On Sox or at Todd J. Dub. You can also find the show on TikTok at Locked On White Sox. You can also email me your questions and comments to lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On White Sox ad-free, plus a members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonwhitesox.supercast.com to join the club. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. On audio, make sure your second listen is Locked On MLB.